Welcome to a special edition of the Ringside Podcast. We've got here Ringside Podcast alum. You've been on the show a few times before, Dr. Ted McNaler. Ted, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. As you can see, I'm inside, staying safe. I know usually we do this in the same room, but obviously with the strange and interesting times we're living in right now, where we're having to physical distance from each other. I try to say physical distance instead of social distance, because I think it's important for us to stay social at this time. But it's definitely crazy times right now, but doing everything we can to stay safe, and hopefully it'll be over soon so we can get back to doing live wrestling and all the fun that comes with going to a live wrestling show.
Absolutely. And we're this is first time really us doing it this way. We got if the video or everything works out, you'll have a video bonus edition on our YouTube channel. So hopefully it does work out and everything, and you're able to see both versions. But the audio for sure will be on the on our normal Ringside Podcast. And if you're listening right now, then you're like on audio, you go, duh, I'm listening to it now. Gotcha. So, but just this is for people that listen to it or watch it on the YouTube and wanted to hear the audio version. Take it in the car, you can. So, with this quarantine pandemic and COVID-19, what's going on, it's kind of made me do a lot of thinking about a lot of different things. It just overall in general, we haven't been in as this probably airs and still at this moment we have not been involved in any events. We haven't. I mean, it's been, I felt like almost a month, probably a little less than that, maybe 3.5 weeks, but right at a month. We haven't had a wrestling show. We haven't, it's been kind of, when that's your normal thing of doing 2 or 3 times a week, going to do a wrestling event or a show and putting things together, or training, practice, whatever you want to call it, and you're not doing any of that, it's kind of changes, kind of messes with your world a little bit. So, and we're not the only ones that that everything is kind of backwards. So we totally understand that. But one of the things that I've been watching is these empty arena matches that WWE's been doing. AEW currently right now, Impact is still on the air with tape shows, so they still have fans when you watch your show. But the other ones are empty arenas, and it makes me it changes the way we see matches right now, because normally when you're in a match, the crowd can dictate a lot of things. They can get what's called emotionally invested into a match, especially a big match like WrestleMania or something like that. And it can kind of really, and we're going to give you examples, it can kind of really change your perspective of how you view the wrestler, how you view the content overall, and maybe leave an impression for the rest of your life. So right now with these empty arena matches and shows, it's kind of like, will they have that same effect 10, 15 years from now? Only time will tell, I guess. But so it made me think about what matches out there, and as you a fan, and me and you are both fans, but we're also workers, so we kind of have a little bit of a two-part part of it. But what is it that makes us, and what can get us emotionally invested into a match, and what matches did have people got emotionally invested, and why, and the importance of that. So, and that's why I wanted Ted to bring you on, because not only are you a doctor and you understand what's going on in the aspects of the world, and and why it's important to quarantine and stay safe and stay away, but also as a wrestler and as a commentator and as a ring announcer, referee. I mean, you pretty much have done it all and still do it all. You're able to kind of and you've been a fan. So you're able to kind of look at it as a whole. You have a good experience. You have good knowledge of what emotionally invested could be. So that's why you're the perfect person to have this on for this episode.
I appreciate that. I consider myself a lifelong fan. No matter how long I've in wrestling, I think I'll always be a fan to some extent. I will say that I am a little saddened that because of the social distancing, we can't include our good friend Jeremy and then on this conversation. But I'll try to hold the fort as best I can and know that I'm looking forward for us having the opportunity to all come together whenever this thing does blow over. But going back to what you were saying about the emotion, and the interesting thing is, as a wrestler, I don't know if fans can fully appreciate that a lot of times what happens in a wrestling match, it is a lot of that is often dictated by how fans are reacting to the match. There's things where you might take more time to do certain moves or parts of the match that you might emphasize more, and there might be other times when you hear the crowd and realize that they're not with a certain part of the match, and you end up cutting and going to something different. So my heart really goes out for these guys that are, worked all year long for the WrestleMania moment and to work in front of an empty crowd. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure it'll still be as good a show as they can possibly make it. But I know it's going to be a heck of a challenge because you don't have that feedback to help you dictate where to keep going with the match, because a lot of these matches I'm sure we're going to talk about, it was the emotion of the crowd that really dictated the certain parts of the match and how they were doing certain things and how they milked certain parts of it. And unfortunately, they don't get the benefit of that at WrestleMania this weekend. But, it'll be interesting to see how they cope and how they work around it. And don't get me wrong, I still think everyone should watch. I think, they'll put on a heck of a show, but it is going to be very, very difficult to perform without having that crowd to give you that feedback.
And by the time this airs, I mean, WrestleMania would have done come and gone. I mean, not very. I mean,
Sure.
just days ago. So, we'll look back and go, wow. You're right. I mean, we don't know it. We just know what they've done so far on TV. They've done a pretty good job. But there's times where, I'm not gonna lie, I've DVR'd and I've been able to. I'm gonna fast forward this a little bit because it does take a little bit out of it. I've watched some of it to kind of see what they do, but then part of it kind of loses my interest in it. But I think WrestleMania will be a different story. But hopefully
Right.
we're able to overcome those things. So, when I put this question out on the social media world, what was going on with it, I asked for examples like, motions, what gave you goosebumps? Why, if you can tell me why. And one of the people that reached out on Twitter was Tracy Roberts, who actually is a huge OVW supporter and fan. So we shout out to her. She comes to a lot of the shows. On Twitter, she's at Lady T282, and she said that which
one of my matches is it? Which one of my matches did she say? Never mind. Go ahead and tell me.
Yeah. It was I don't know if you were in this match or not, but it was actually Survivor Series '97 match between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, which is the Montreal Screwjob, and basically she said she cried when it happened. Now, I asked her, I got a little more details. I said, well, okay, did you know what was going on? Because I remember it, and I remember being confused and like, whoa, this is, I was, you could tell there was emotion involved in the whole finish and everything was going on, but I still couldn't quite understand what was happening. So it took a few, watch it over in days, and then later, the stories and whatnot that came out to understand exactly what happened. But and she was like, yeah, I mean, I knew for a fact that, she said, she goes, I didn't know they screwed him, but I knew for a fact that it wasn't right. I could tell something wasn't right. And her being a huge Bret fan, she said it really just kind of, did it. And she said, other than the next time she really cried like that in a match was actually when Bret at WrestleMania 26 got to take on McMahon and kind of get his, get him back, after all those years for what he did. So that's that right there is what a 15 something year, distance between there, something like that, right? Or 12. I mean, it's a lot of years in between the screw job compared to when WrestleMania 26 happened. So, that's a lot to be invested in a wrestler. And of course, Bret Hart is probably her favorite. So I can see that. But, do you remember watching it, the screw job, and what was your take on it, Ted?
So I've seen it in retrospect. At the time, I was watching more WCW at the time, so I was not watching that particular angle. But looking back at the time, I mean, I agree. I was always very interested because I didn't see the match until I was actually involved in wrestling. But I remember seeing it and couldn't help but think, how did the fans take it? So I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to talk to Tracy about it, because I was very curious, because I mean, from my standpoint, obviously being a wrestler, you could tell something just didn't feel right about it. But you didn't know. I mean, really, I knew the situation prior to watching the match, so going into it, I knew. But I always try to take myself out of my preconceived notions just to see it from a different lens, and it was just very awkward, especially on the back end. You could just see the emotion as soon as Bret lost. It was just like he just, I mean, and understandably so, just became enraged at that point.
Well,
and
I guess in wrestling you never really win or lose. It's just whatever they tell you what it is. He technically didn't lose, he didn't tap.
Right, yeah, he didn't tap.
But yeah, when he called for the bell, the crazy thing about that, I have a lot of history behind that. Has an emotional tie to me too, because that literally was the very first ever pay-per-view that I purchased. I had my friends over, and we would do it for the next 4 years, I don't know how many years, where they every month they would come over and everybody would pay $5. We all watched the pay-per-view. That was the very first one that my mother let me order and bring everybody over and have a monthly party. So that has and then of course I remember going, what the world just happened? Now I love Shawn Michaels and what was going on with the DX and the move, and I was kind of in that group, so I kind of was like, screw you, Bret, get out of here, because they said if Bret loses, he leaves or whatever it was, and you kind of, the writing was on the wall. And but of course I just think it was a typical wrestling. He's jumping to WCW, and just like everybody else was jumping back and forth. So at the time, it was emotional, but I just thought it was another great, man, they pulled it off so great, until a year later when I found out, or months later when I found out, oh, this was legit. They screwed Bret. And even Bret, which was weird, is that he came out, and you would never thought he would come out and publicly just say what he said. And you're like, you mean you just said that all the stuff that you did all these years where you were this great champion was not really real? Wait a minute, so it kind of made the business, exposed it a little bit, but rightfully so, it had to, I guess, if you're, if you felt like you got screwed, which he did, although I understand business, so I understand that they had to do what they had to do. I just wish Bret and them could have worked it out and did something better. So it's funny how a lot of these, looking at all this list of different people sent me, a lot of it has to, one of the guys that's in almost every single match is the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And he's by far, now he's not my favorite wrestler of all time. That would have to be The Rock, but he legit is the greatest. He's the best wrestler of all time, if that makes sense, in my opinion.
Yes. And in my opinion, I agree the same thing. When people ask me, the difference between who my favorite and who I think the greatest is, a favorite sometimes changes, but growing up, I was a big fan of Ultimate Warrior. I mean, take what you will from that. I just always enjoyed the character and the just the huge character that he was. But as a complete all-around wrestler, I feel like Shawn was truly the best of all time. I really do think that.
I mean, people, you can say Flair, people say Hogan. Some people even say Austin, and and I can see arguments for each one, but
yeah,
you look overall what they've done. In character, they kind of stayed. Shawn always kind of stayed who he was, even he tweaked it just a little bit, but always stayed the same character for the most part. Where people evolve, like Undertaker changed a few times. Chris Jericho, man, he's really reinvented himself many times, and those work for them. And I think where Shawn, he didn't have to. I think that, and people don't realize that's actually a plus. That's actually a good thing. It's not, he didn't have to reinvent himself. He tweaked what he needed to tweak, but still keep the same character overall. So that's another bonus. And still did the same in the ring and retired when he needed to retire too. But Travis Thomas mentioned, speaking of HBK, and we talked about Ric Flair just a second ago, that HBK versus Flair at WrestleMania 24. He mentioned that he remember crying, so emotional. He said basically the final moments of that match was just his actual words was fire. Just like it was on fire. There's one or two more that mentioned that same match too as an honorable mention, and we'll get to, and so it obviously does ring a bell to a lot of people. I remember watching that match, and I remember being like, oh man, I remember taking my emotions into it, because you knew this was probably Flair's last match, although I guess he did have another match at TNA later, but you knew this was his last match. So it was a way of ending the match and ending his career in the WWE in ring was definitely a special moment.
Yeah, it certainly was. I remember watching it. That one I do have a vivid memory of because I was watching it with a group of other wrestlers at OVW at the time. And I remember we all, even right before the match started, we hit pause, had to get all our drinks and food ready so that way we could all sit down and have no interruptions because we also didn't know, if they were going to try to, pull an hour or what they were going to do. But, we wanted to make sure that we were giving the match our full attention and it didn't disappoint, especially in a group of wrestlers that have really bad ADD and interrupt sometimes. Everyone was dead silent the whole time. And then obviously at the end, it was like, just the appreciation that everyone felt in the room. It was literally palpable. You could just feel I can't say I necessarily teared up, but you could feel the emotion in the room though. It definitely was moving to say the least.
When I read Shawn's book, he talked about that match and he said that, his idol is Ric Flair. So that's who he looked up to. That's who he, and it's one of the things, I've had the privilege of meeting, people that you've looked up to and then you become kind of friends with. I mean, one of them is our mentor, Al Snow, one of the owners of OVW. And the fact that, I've looked up to him as a wrestler and us being kind of mentoring, but also friends, it's kind of like, whoa, kind of surreal. So I can understand kind of, where that comes from, for Shawn. And then the fact that he, was emotionally invested in, you can feel he was emotionally invested into the match himself. Like he was wrapped everything into it. But he wrote in his book that he was really trying to think of the perfect way to come with the finish. And they had a couple ideas and it just wasn't right. He said I think he said he was praying. He was at Bible study, was praying, whatever. All of a sudden it came to him. He said, that's it. That's it. He told Rick, and Rick was like, oh, absolutely. So that was kind of, and that ended up being the perfect way of ending. And even today, when I watch it, I get goosebumps, and I kind of, it gets you. It was a special moment for sure. Dallas Roots, he had a couple matches he mentioned. He mentioned Hogan and Warrior, which you being a Warrior fan, WrestleMania 6, I believe that's what it was. And then he also mentioned Austin and Rock, and I had to give clarification because they've had many matches, but of course 3 at WrestleMania, and I figured it was one of the 3. And he did say WrestleMania 17, which was the second match at Houston, in Houston at the what was the Astrodome? I guess is that what it was? Whatever that.
I think so. It wasn't the Silver Dome. I know that.
No, it wasn't the Silver Dome. But yeah. So I don't too much remember Hogan Warrior. I mean, I do remember. I've seen it obviously, but I got into wrestling a little bit after that, so I would go back and watch those stuff, but I wasn't emotionally invested. It was more like catching up on, kind of like when you get into a TV show and you're catching the 3rd season, you go back and watch the first couple seasons just to kind of see where you're at, and it doesn't. Sometimes not all the times you get emotionally invested into it because you just kind of want to see where it led you to where you're at now. So it's kind of the same concept. I knew of Hogan. Obviously, I was a kid. You knew Hulk Hogan, you knew all this stuff, but you didn't know the history of these wrestlers and these angles. So I did go back and kind of watch some of that, but I wasn't emotionally invested into it. So I can't really speak on that. But looking at it though, I can see why people were drawn to it because these two icons, coming together and, and people wanted Warrior to take over, and you never thought he would, being, Intercontinental Champion, and Hogan being the, WWF champion. Like there's no way that this would happen, champion versus champion, whatever it was. And but it turned out to be a really phenomenal match.
Yeah, it really was. Now that is one I do remember. And now I'll briefly touch on it. It was interesting growing up. I would watch WWF as a kid, and then as I got a little older and got into late grade school, early high school, I'm sorry, more late grade school, because it was about 96 or so, I started watching WCW because I realized a lot of, and I just didn't know. I was like, oh, all the big stars are now on this one now. And then it was actually kind of during the Attitude Era that I started getting back into WWF. And it was funny. I remember the reason I switched, talking about being emotionally invested, is I was watching WCW and I saw Lex Luger do a run-in. And I saw him throw a punch that had about a foot of air between him and the guy that he was attempting to hit. And then the guy still went down as if he was hit. And my thought as a kid, being 12, 13 years old at the time, was, oh, okay, WCW must be fake WWF must be real. Go figure. But anyway, going back to as a kid, I was a big WWF fan, a big Ultimate Warrior fan. So I do remember that match and being so invested. And I remember kids in my class at the time would make fun of me because everyone else was a Hogan fan, and me. I would like to tell you about. There was a couple other kids that were Warrior fans, but we felt like that was our guy, and we were passionate for him, and so it was especially a emotional matchup in the sense that we were really excited for it. And so I remember that being a great match, and then going back and seeing it, I thought it was just as good as I remember as a kid. It was a really well done match, especially given, anytime you have two baby faces or two heels or anything like that go against each other, it can be a really hard match to work and get people emotionally invested, and they were able to keep people the entire time, the 20 plus minutes that they were wrestling.
And it's funny because both his matches were technically baby versus baby, but understanding like the business now, looking back on it, I always wondered why Warrior didn't have the belt longer or didn't have belts more times. But no one understanding now that as soon as Warrior got the title, unfortunately he couldn't. It just people were invested wanting to get there, but once he got there, it was like the title wasn't. He didn't. What is the term? You make the title doesn't make you, or whatever it was, and it was like clearly
true. And I think also a big part of that is really you're only as good of a baby face as much as with as much heat as the heel has. And I think at the time there really was not a really dominant heel for him to face. Like I remember when he went up against Slaughter, I was like, well, Warrior's going to win. I didn't have any belief that Slaughter. Although if I remember, I think Slaughter did end up beating him.
Yeah.
Am I wrong on that? But I remember at the time I wasn't invested because I didn't think, I just felt like Warrior after beat Hogan, it's like, well, what threat is there the Warrior? And they really didn't have anyone to be able to step up and be that threat to the Ultimate Warrior, in my opinion. And looking in retrospect, and I think that was a big reason why at that point it's like, well, there's really nowhere to go from here.
And I agree with that. And the only I've heard Bruce Pritchard argue and say, well, but Hogan, there was times when Hogan didn't have your Slaughter or your Iron Sheik or whoever it was, and then still stayed on top. But then again, Hogan was Hogan, and they're just two different people. Hogan, at the time Hulkamania was still running wild and crazy, and Warrior it was just a different fan base that he applied to compared to Hogan. But yeah, his other match he mentioned, like I said, Austin and Rock, WrestleMania 17. And I literally just watched this match last night. So, but I remember that being baby versus baby, and of course it turned into, Austin turning heel at the end. But man, was that I was watching it last night, even though I've seen it probably 100 times. I literally was I had goosebumps. I had moments where they go for he hits the stunner, and I'm like, oh, he hits him with the chair, and Austin hits him with the chair, goes for the pin. And he's like, oh, this is a 1. And then Rock kicks out at 3.5 or 2 3/4, whatever. And it's like, oh my, I just went nuts. I was like, yes, and it's, even though I knew the outcome and knew that he was going to kick out because that wasn't the finish, still, it got me. It made me jump. It got exciting. That crowd was just they were just going nuts, and they literally had them in the palm of their hand. And that right there shows you that not only were people like me and you watching at home and all these other, and even Dallas mostly invested into it, but the whole entire arena was mostly, and you can see it, they were invested in this match. And I will say that was probably one of the greatest WrestleMania build-up ever, with the packages they did, how they just that using the Limp Bizkit song, and just the promo, all of that stuff leading up was great too. And that's what made you so invested into this. Who was the greatest, or at that time, who was the best, Rock or Hogan? Who was it? And it was literally your two favorites, and who's gonna overcome. And then when you could see the crowd booing Rock and wanting Austin, but then when Austin started doing heelish things.
You mean Hogan?
No.
Hogan Rock or Austin?
No, this is
Rock?
Austin Rock.
Okay.
17.
You mentioned Hogan.
Yeah. Well, I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe because I was looking at the paper from Warrior. So when when Austin was doing, they were going crazy for Austin when Rock was, and he wasn't doing Hillish things. Well, then Austin started doing Hillish things, and then they caught on to it. The fans were like, "What are you doing?" And they started booing him a little bit and cheering more for Rock. And it's almost like they were just going back and forth. They really didn't. They did. I don't think they wanted the match to end. And then, of course, they really went ballistic when Austin completely turned heel with McMahon, and they were like, "What?" So then they knew they didn't want him to win at all. But that's a roller coaster, and that right there is how that anybody should watch that match and see one of the reasons, especially in the worker, how you can get the crowd in the palm of your hand, because they did it perfectly.
Absolutely, and I'd even take it a step further, and I think that was just a well executed. And I'm not taking anything away. Those guys, I think, if the card prior to that would have not been so good, they would have still killed it. But I also think that WrestleMania in particular is one of the best built WrestleMania shows of all time. I felt like from the beginning to the end, that was one of the best WrestleManias. And that's why it's just as important, not just to have a great match, but to build a card properly throughout the show. Sometimes I feel like, you might have a couple segments that are hit or miss, and that can sometimes take the crowd away from being as emotionally invested. Or I'll be honest, I feel like the last couple years of WrestleMania, it's just gone on so long that by the end, still have great matches, but you can just tell the crowd is just tired by the time they finally get to the main event.
And what I like is, I heard Jericho talk about this recently. He mentioned that him and Regal opened the show, and by the time they realized they were opening WrestleMania, blah blah blah, and they go, "Oh yeah, you guys, you're 9 minutes, 9 minutes with entrances, everything they had to do WrestleMania. 9 minutes they had to do. They went out and they did great.
Right? That's not a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time." And I think nowadays 9 minutes is not as it's almost like that would be a very 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 quick match in WrestleMania, where usually they get a little bit about 20 minutes, and of course we know this is with your entrance and everything, so we know WrestleMania entrances are longer than normal, and we get all that. So the in-ring work was probably at that point only 6, maybe. Take a minute and a half for each one, or maybe, I don't know. William Regal, I think, kind of went to the ring pretty fast. Jericho kind of did his thing, so maybe really in ring was only 4 minutes. But they really, they did it was a great and pacing it like that, like it was well paced, because you had that. Then you had your Intercontinental title match. That was the one. I'm sorry. The women's title match with China and Ivory, and that was done. All that was done right, and you had your hardcore match and
the gimmick battle royal. I remember that one too.
Gimmick battle royal, right? And everything was just like, you're right, paced really well. And that set the stage, and you had you had Taker and Triple H, one of their first ever match together at WrestleMania. They had a couple more later, but that was paced well, and that was done well. And yeah, the crowd was up and down throughout the whole match, and then you build to the main event. So it was probably one of the best WrestleManias. The only one to me that I think overall would probably be 31, because of just how well they paced that, even though it was a long show. That was done really well. But yeah, it was a great WrestleMania for sure. But that just, that you get emotionally invested. You can see right there. And I think there's other matches in there too that you can probably watch. Like I said, overall WrestleMania, I think the crowd was really into it. Everybody was into it, for sure. Let's see. There's another match I mentioned a few times. Let's see Matt and Chris and let's see who else here. Oh, we mentioned Austin and Bret at WrestleMania 13, especially the final moments of the match. And that basically is your typical, what they call the double turn, where, Bret's the baby, Austin's the heel, but at the end of the match, Bret's the heel, Austin's the baby. And it was executed very well, and it was a very emotional match. And me being a referee, I got to give a shout out to Ken Shamrock, who did a phenomenal job as a referee, in that stayed out of the way, didn't get involved until he needed to get involved, and it's
hard to believe he was just starting out in pro wrestling. He did such a good job with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he was, I just, when I rewatched it recently, I was watching Ken, and I was just like, man, people don't give him the credit of really, and I don't know if he had a earpiece and was giving time cues or anything. I don't know if he was or not, but it was just, man, he did a really good job. So he doesn't get that much credit for that moment, but yeah, it was a great match, and to see the color, that was where color in a match made sense and was important, and just really set the emotion into what it was, and you needed that. You needed that to have that double turn. It leaves a lasting impression on many, especially Austin fans, because they see that iconic moment of Austin, the blood pouring down, and him screaming agony and pain, and you knew he's in pain. You could see it, not just because of the color. You could just see it in his face. You could see it in his emotions. You knew that the guy's in pain, and we need to stop this match. And he passes out, and there you go. So it makes, and you can as a fan, Al Snow talks about this a lot. There's a lot of things that the fans don't understand what it feels like, but certain things they do know. And that moment, you knew those fans, even watching at home, felt what he was feeling. You can see, they knew what he was going, that he was in pain. Everyone's had something twisted or turned and just can't get, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that was that moment right there.
Yeah, I agree. That was very well done. And I remember that was one of the first big, WrestleMania matches that I saw, because I remember when I was just getting into, because I remember back in the day I wasn't allowed to watch the pay-per-views just because we didn't have the money or the cable, so I'd have to wait till it came out at my local video store to go and rent the VHS tape to put it in my VCR and go back and watch. I remember that was one of the first shows that I remember getting from the video store, and yeah, that was just, I remember as a kid watching it, and it was so different than any match I remember seeing, especially just the brutality of it. Because really, up until that point, a lot of the wrestling, at least that I had been exposed to, even though WCW was just kind of coming around to, get more edgy at the time, it was kind of more, over the top, hokey, family friendly style of wrestling. And this was just more of that brutal, brawl between two guys, and it told a story. And I can't say it's necessarily a brawl because it was very technical too, but it felt like a fight. And so that's why I also liked having Ken Shamrock in there, especially since he was so high in UFC at the time and a well-respected, he had the moniker of the world's most dangerous man, and he had earned that moniker. And so I just remember all around, it just felt like such an important match and such a really a big moment for both of their careers. And actually all three, really, because it was a big moment for Shamrock too, because right after that, he soon, started his start in WWF at the time, and his rise through that time.
Absolutely. And it literally, that's what, Austin 316 was born, way prior to that, but that literally launched what we know as Stone Cold Steve Austin, and then what later led to Bret, leaving and being,
right. And if anything, if anything, I felt that was a catalyst for Bret to start getting that edge too, and then he started to, be not just, the happy-go-lucky baby face or the plucky baby face. He was, had a little more edge to him after that. At least I felt that as a fan.
Yeah, I think that year was Bret's best year, period. From him coming back in that where he fought Austin at Survivor Series all the way up until literally a year later when he leaves, I think his work was the best. Him being the Canadian lover and America hater, whatever you need. I just think that was the best. It worked. For them. It was just it was off the charts. It led to his, I don't want to say demise because he had a few years left, but it left to him leaving WWF and all that. But like I said, it was probably his best year overall. And when I look back at his career, speaking of his earlier career, Chris Meyer, his match that he mentioned was Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect for the IC title at SummerSlam 91. Now that's, I wasn't, as kind of earlier about the Hogan Warrior, didn't watch this live or during the time, but I have went back and seen it over the years, and it was a great match, and you can feel the emotion into it for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Perfect is another one of those guys I feel like was one of the greatest all-rounders of all time. Well, yeah. And that match I've watched several times just to pick out little pieces of it, and it's so good. It's truly, if you haven't seen it, first of all, do yourself a favor. It's truly, I think that's one of those matches too, where if those two were to go out and do a similar match today, I think it would still hold up in today's audiences, which are, wanting, a little more of, these more high action, high impact style matches. I felt like that with the emotion, and they just worked really well together, and it was just very well done. I've seen that match several times. And in fact, I think it was around that time Mr. Perfect, he had a string of really good matches. I think around that time he had one with Roddy Piper as well. I remember being really, and again, this was same as you. I had to go back, and not a match I saw at the time because again, I wasn't watching a lot of the big show matches back then. But going back and watching it, I just remember, Mr. Perfect around that time was just so good, and him and Bret, obviously Bret being one of the best. It was just an incredible matchup.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Looking back too, is that you're right, Mr. Perfect. There's a lot of things that he just doesn't get. I mean, I guess he gets a lot more credit now, but at the time, I don't think he had the credit.
Right.
For being the great worker and wrestler that he was. Overall, he was amazing. It definitely. If you haven't seen that match, go check it out. And like I said, check out a lot of Mr. Perfect stuff. He's really good, for sure. Now, Alan Hogan, he's no relation to Terry Hulk, but he picked interesting match because a lot of people pick matches from WrestleMania, one from SummerSlam and whatnot, but he picked a match from a Monday Night Raw. It was Jeff Hardy versus Undertaker, which was the ladder match that happened. I looked it up here. It was the July 1st of 2002, and I remember that whole ladder match. I mean, that was wow. I remember that. So he said he was the most emotionally invested in that, and I can see, a lot of times you're right. There's a lot of big stuff that's happened on Raw and stuff that we don't really realize can affect you in ways. So he said the aftermath and everything from it just made him just really sucked him into to this whole angle and this match. Do you remember that at all?
I do. I remember seeing that one live, and looking back, I mean, you're right. That was just a great emotional match, and I dare say that was really what helped Jeff Hardy kind of solidify himself as a single star. Obviously, we don't know what would have happened had he not had that match, but I think that match went a long way in setting his run to eventually become the world champion. Just because that really helped, solidify that even though he lost, that he's a future contender. And I felt that really for both, and Undertaker, had no, he was already at his peak, past, well and above, being over. But even then, I felt like that also showed that Undertaker, was able to, go just as hard as he ever was. And if anything, I felt that it even helped make, even though he didn't need to be made, it helped make the Undertaker, show that, he had that extra hardcore edge to him. He always had the mystique about him, but I think, that particular ladder match, showed that he could hang with the best of them, just like he always had. And for Jeff, obviously, it solidified him as a main eventer, in my opinion.
Well, it's one of those things that kind of back to Bret and Austin, too. The loser, that made Austin, and he lost. This made Jeff, and he lost. So a lot of times it's not about who wins or loses, although it is, but it always is not either. It's about what they do afterwards, and what Jeff was able to do after that. And you're right, solidify him as a singles competitor, where he was a Hardy Boy. He was Matt and Jeff, and I think. Took Matt a little longer just because of where he was in the card compared to where Jeff, because of this moment. I think you can probably throw Matt in this position. Matt could have done the same thing and went on, but it showed Jeff as being I'm not just a tag team guy, and definitely made him a star, and probably made the Jeff Hardy who we are today. Because now, right now you got Matt in AEW and Jeff in WWE. So each one is gonna have to do their own thing, and and obviously we know Jeff can handle it. He's done it. He's led it many times, been champion many times, and in TNA and other places. So for sure, Ben Sharon wrote a few ideas, our matches. He mentioned, of course, Flair and HBK. He said just the story, building up the storytelling, that was all fantastic, and just the ending, of course, which we talked about. He also brought up a couple of other ones, one being Bret Hart versus HBK at WrestleMania 12. He said, that being HBK's first title, and he said he was just really the Iron Man match. as we know it to be, and they went completely. So they had no falls, and they went an hour. Like that's just unheard of that the guys went that long, and then they went in sudden death. So they went another 7 minutes or so afterwards, or a few minutes afterwards. I forget how many. It wasn't that much longer, but that was just that was wow. That was amazing match, and I remember watching that, being emotionally into it, and just I was on the edge of my seat every time one of them do a big move. Like this was it, and I especially towards the end, I expected one of them to get ahead before the timer ran out. When they didn't, when the timer ran out, I'm like, what is going on? I just it was well done, well executed, and as much as they had problems, personally, and I understand both of their opinions on each one, but in the ring, man, they had the greatest chemistry ever, and they worked, and maybe that's because they didn't like each other. It made it better, but they had the greatest chemistry. Probably, I don't think Bret Hart, even though he had matches good with with Austin and a few other people, we mentioned here, but I don't think anybody was matched. I think his best matches were always with Shawn, no doubt.
Agreed. I agree 100%. I think despite their personal issues, they were always able to bring it in the ring. And the fact that, you have a lot of guys that can wrestle long matches, but I think really the talent comes into, can you retain the audience for that long? Because there's been some great long matches, that are an hour, but you go back and watch, and while it's a good match, there's still parts where it just feels kind of like, okay, it's kind of a dead spot, or just not as, emotionally invested in parts of it. But I remember watching that match and, being held on at every moment. They had me the whole hour. And so I think that's an even bigger testament, not only that they had a great match, but they were able to, keep that intensity and that emotional investment for the entire hour plus that they went out there.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, for sure. He also mentioned, which this is actually, I was so into this one too, Punk versus Cena, Money in the Bank 2011. This is after the famous pipe bomb that Cena cut, and he looked like he was pretty much, it was his last day. He extended a 1-day contract and worked it, and they decided to, put the title on him. He, in Chicago, his home crowd just did not want Cena to even lay a finger on Punk, and that got you emotionally into, because of what happened with the famous pipe bomb right before that, and a few weeks before that, and just everything in general. And this is, wow, this was amazing. Great business, and the fact that when Punk wins, he up and takes off with the title at the crowd. He said, I legit just went off the front door, hopped in my buddy's car, threw it, and drove off, went to my home, and he goes, that was it. He goes, not, and it's it's crazy to think that they did that or whatever, but that's pretty wild. And one of the best matches of Punk's career, Cena's career, all of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I was well into my wrestling career at the point. So it was one of those things where I felt maybe I didn't have, the same emotional investment that, an otherwise casual fan might have. But I remember as a worker, a wrestler, that I was still blown away by just their ability to work such a a powerful match, at least from an emotional standpoint. It was technical. It had the emotional aspect of it. It was hard hitting, and they delivered. I think as far as those two go, and you got to think of the incredible matches they had. I think really for both those guys, I think that was, in my opinion, anyway, I think that was for both those guys the best match that either one has had, and that's not taking anything away from the incredible matches either one has had, because I don't want to say that, but I'm just saying that particular moment, you just had everything from the angle itself was good, the promos building up to it were good, the delivery was so good, and you couldn't have a better match between those guys.
And to Punk's credit, he would not sign the extension contract they kept offering him. He would not do anything, and they were like, well, and also they were smart to keep put the title on him and say we can always do a tournament or whatever. He left, and that's what they kind of did, and we know he came back and whole 9 yards. But you thought for sure, because of everything in the dirt sheets, that he legit was done. This was it. So you didn't expect him to win whatsoever. So then the fact that they could swerve the audience and have him walk away with the championship was pretty good too as well. And that kind of, oh my God, did that just really just happen? And then he's up and gone, So, and I still think that 2 weeks later when he shows up on Raw and stands with Cena and with both titles, and he's like, I'm the champion. That was a great moment too. Later, it turned into that. So, great business in 2011. So, I love when they do stuff like that, and they have some. It's almost, unfortunately, it's kind of, they have good moments, and then they're few and far between now. Where a lot of times back in the day, they used to have a good 3-4 month of a good. Oh, this is a great angle. This is great business every week. Hopefully they get back into that. I know it's hard writing that much TV. They have to write per week, so I get it. Let's see. Big Ticket Brandon Abels brought up one of my favorite matches. He said HBK and Taker at WrestleMania 25. I literally like get so emotion, goosebumps, tears. Like I really get into that match every single time I watch it. It is by far, without a doubt, my favorite match of all time. So I am emotionally invested into it. Like I said, every time I watch it, I am literally on the edge of my seat. Every false finish, every big move, even when Taker does the dive and almost gets killed by the cameraman and doesn't catch him, and it looks like he breaks his neck. All of that, I'm literally on the edge of my seat the entire time, and I've seen it probably 100 times. So I just remember the storyline. I'm thinking, HBK is he going to take the streak away? Is he finally going to do it? Is he going to retire? This is, in of course, the year later he has the retirement match. So this is the first one, and I just it literally just kind of takes me to a whole new level watching it. It's by far, and I watch the referee in that match, which actually is no longer with WWE anymore, but I watch him and his moments and when he did, and just
who's that?
His name's Marty. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember who it was. Let me look him up here.
I'm trying to think too now.
His name is Marty Ellis.
Okay.
Yeah. He that was literally his he actually left the company about a few months shortly after that.
I don't blame him. After that, what else is there to do? So, hey.
True. But yeah, he was but I remember watching him his spots, especially now. I mean, I mean, of course, then I didn't watch as much, but me being a referee, I kind of focused a lot. So I remember a few times I went back and watched it, I've watched kind of where he was in certain spots and certain moments, and how it was important for him to be out of the way or there here and there. And so yeah, so it's just everything about that clicked. And what I think I like about it is hearing later is that there was a lot of stuff they planned, a lot of stuff they didn't, and a lot of stuff they planned that they didn't do because they listened to the crowd. And they changed and they went on, and it was just amazing match. Like I said, it's my favorite match of all time. I have a couple other ones that are honorable mentions. Even, like I said, Rock and Austin 17 is up there too, one of the top 5. So it's right there. Yeah, just wow. That's if you want a good match that gets, as we like to get all your stuff in, as wrestlers like to do, but yet at the same time have everyone at the palm of your hand. That's a good match to watch. And they did it at the right time. They did the right finishes, the right false finishes, all that at the right time. And you had a great story. They told you a story, and you were invested into the story of who they were and what they were trying to tell you, the story they were getting across too.
Absolutely, and that's a testament to going back to what you were saying, listening to the crowd. So you had two guys who just were the ultimate professional wrestlers, and just that's hard too. Is if you can be a great wrestler, but being in there with someone maybe doesn't have that experience or that understanding of how to go with the crowd and just trusting your opponent to go with it, that can throw a match off too, because you have one guy that's trying to dictate or lead the pace of the match. And if the other guy is resistant or still trying to stick with the plan or less willing to, go on the fly, then that's where things can get messed up. And that was one of those situations where just, everything I think that's another one of those matches where everything was perfect. I mean, you look back, that one botch happened with the camera guy, but it's not like it was either Taker or Shawn's fault. And they worked it. They worked that, after that happened.
Oh yeah.
And that helped make the actual match.
And here, and when I always look in that too, and maybe even Shawn said this at one time in an interview, but it's like, yes, that was a botch or that was a spot or didn't happen perfectly, but why should it happen perfectly? It's real,
right?
It doesn't always have to be perfect, and that's what I think a lot of times, I see, and I know you see it too, but I definitely see it in the ring as being a referee, is that certain things didn't go exactly planned. The crowd has no idea, but and all of a sudden there's a panic mode or something goes into, and you're like, just guys, work that, use that. That is a gift.
Absolutely.
That's a gift.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was your actions are never as important as your reactions.
And that's true in life, period.
Yeah.
Your
right.
reaction is what makes or break you. So and your reaction to that, it's moments. Me and you've had a few moments before in wrestling where we've, even after the show or after the match or whatever it was, we'll go, that was a great little moment. I love having those, and we just have and it wasn't planned. It just, we reacted to something right there in front of us or something that happened or whatever it was. And, that's what you do. And that's, and yeah, maybe 5 people saw it and laughed, or maybe not laughed or saw it or whatever but the point is that we reacted. We didn't just, oh no, that wasn't planned, so we walked away. No, we reacted to what we saw, what was there, and went on. And that's what I think a lot of people should do. And that's a perfect example of, and there's many botched stuff you can watch and then see the reaction afterwards and see some of the greatest, like HBK and Undertaker and probably, Rock, Cena, some of these guys, that Austin, how they reacted to it. But yeah, for sure, that's a great moment right there. But yeah, it's just, to this day, literally, if I watch it right now, I will, and even though I know the outcome, I probably know this match in and out, I'm going to react. I'm going to think the finish is the finish. I'm going to, get goosebumps when they kick out, and, just, everything. So what a great match.
Before you move on, I'm just curious, how do you feel the next year's match compared?
I felt like the problem that I have is that even though they could have swerved me because they've done it before, I felt like I knew it was Shawn's last match.
Yeah, I did too.
And so I did like the story of, like, I'm going to beat him. If I don't beat him, I'm done. And I like the idea. And granted, it's a top match. I mean, it's up there. It could easily. But I just don't, and I think they did things differently than they did in this match. They went back to a couple spots purposely, like you should. I don't. To me, this is number one. If I make a list of top matches of all time, it would still be in the top 10, maybe even close to the top 5. It's up there. But it just was. It was different to me. I think because I kind of knew. Which made me think I knew he was going to lose, because in wrestling, when you retire and you go out on your back, so it made me think there's no way he's going to win and then retire,
Right.
But if he win, he didn't have to, I guess, technically in the storyline. But so yeah.
And for me, it was that, and then I would add the extra piece, because here's the thing. I think when Ric Flair wrestled Shawn, we knew that was going to be his last match, but we also knew this was one of the few times those two were going to go and have an epic match together, versus when you went into this match, they had set the bar so high the year before that I remember going into and thinking I wasn't interested, only because I thought, how in the heck are they going to top what they did last year, because it was about perfect. And so that was my thing, and I think part of me wanted to see Shawn have a final match with someone that was coming up at the time. And it's not nothing to take away from Taker. I just thought they had that epic moment. And to me, I'm very big on wanting to see, people pass the torch to the, the next generation. And so I guess I was hoping that Shawn would have an opportunity to, he wasn't in WWE at the time, but, like someone like an AJ Styles or Daniel Bryan or someone that was coming in as kind of a passing the torch type of thing. And it's not taking away from the match. It was incredible. But I think part of me wasn't as interested simply because, one, I knew the outcome. Two, I felt like I had seen this epic match before, as great as it was. And three, I think part of me, kind of wanted to see Shawn, get one more chance against the young blood that was coming up. But that's not taking anything away from it again. Right. It's just more so it wasn't as emotionally investing for me.
Another thing, too, is that when it was the main event, it kind of gave it away, too. I think, and of course, it needed to be the main event. I mean, there's nothing bigger than that match. I get it. But right. The previous one wasn't the main event. This one was the main event. So you knew that, and the story was the whole, they used the, I think, it was, okay, the first one was the Christian versus the dark side kind of deal, right? I think, and this one more of a retirement versus the streak. So it right, it wasn't, and yeah, it's a good point on the, seeing somebody, give a young guy a chance. Like, actually, Kurt Angle, like just recently last year, had his last match against Baron Corbin, and people were kind of upset that he let Baron Corbin beat him, but it was like, I'm passing the torch. I love Baron. Baron's a great guy. I personally thought it would make more sense to have Cena come out, and since Cena was his first match, and or Kurt Angle was Cena's first match, let John Cena be Kurt Angle's last match or whatever. Like, I was thinking that would be symbolic in my opinion, but they didn't do it that way. But I'm okay with them using Baron and kind of passing the torch and letting him use that retired Kurt Angle kind of whole gimmick going forward. And like I said, I'm perfectly okay with that. So I guess it's kind of like, it just kind of depends on what side of it. But Shawn and AJ Styles, that would have been the ultimate final. I would have been happy with that. And I guess it still could happen because Shawn did come back and do another match.
True.
And the only one that
money talks.
Money does talk. So I guess it could happen, and I'm okay with that. I just don't know if it'll be as good as what it would have been in 10 years ago. But sure. Who knows? They could surprise us. One of my other favorites that wasn't really mentioned as much. Well, it was by others later, and I just didn't write down who they were. But when I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it was a mistake. But that's okay. But it's Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania 18. That is another one that that is my second favorite match of all time. It's tied between that and Rock and Austin, but that right there is just icon versus icon. They came in, Rock the baby, Hollywood Hulk Hogan the heel, but that Toronto crowd and that WWF crowd at the time wanted their Hulk Hogan back. And you can tell they were not feeling it, and they literally, what I have to give Rock and Hogan credit, because they're the pros that they are, they listened to the crowd. They didn't really do much. If you watch the match, they didn't do much at all. They just fed the crowd. They switched roles. Rock turned heel, and Hogan was the baby, and they just let it happen. And that shows you right there what crowd... There was no way any of that was called before. There's no way they went in the back and said, this is what we're going to do. Because I guarantee if they did, when they came out there, they said, oh, they're not doing anything we just called, buddy. This is what we're going to do now. And they just fed the crowd. And I don't even, honestly, I'm watching it. It doesn't even look like they're calling spots. It looks like they're just filling each other out, which is what Hogan and Rock can do, because they're one of the greatest two of all time to do it. So that still to this day, another one gives me goosebumps. Everything about it. Love that match.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just goes a testament to the professionalism of both. And you could make arguments for, we talked about, in our opinion, Shawn Michaels, one of the greatest, but I think either of those guys are going to could fall into that same category, just of being able to work a crowd. I think Al Snow, our beloved leader at OVW, has even got on record and saying that he feels, Hulk Hogan is perhaps the greatest professional wrestler on time, simply because he was able to convince how many hundreds of thousands of people over the years to buy a ticket to come and see him. And it wasn't more apparent than that particular night when he made, his big return to WrestleMania. after so many years of being away from that big event, and the crowd just was eating in the palm of both of their hands at the time, and just for them to be able to switch on the fly and put on such a great main event. If anything, I felt bad for Triple H and Jericho who had to follow that. It was one of those years where the main event should have been changed, but you don't know until it happens, and it's like, oh man, but what an incredible moment that was. It was cool.
So I got the privilege a few years ago. Actually, it was right at Al Snow was a couple booths away, but I got the privilege of interviewing Jerry the King Lawler on Ringside. And those of you listening, go back and check it out. Great little interview, one of our first season. But Jerry Lawler talked about some of the different things, and one of the things that I asked him was what was not only his favorite match he ever had, but then what was his favorite match he ever called as a commentator. And he said it was this match. He goes, it was that match right there was my favorite. He goes, the Toronto crowd, you can feel it. You can watch the guys switch rows. He said that was my favorite match. He goes, you were talking. Jerry the King Law has called pretty much every match we've named for the most part, other than the early WWF ones. But he's called all these amazing matches, and that one is his favorite he ever got to announce. I will say his favorite, actually go back and go listen to it to see what his favorite match is.
You can't give it all away, Daniel. Yeah. You got to go back and listen.
Yeah, go back and listen. But it's cool how he explains why it was, and I kind of gave you a little idea, but he goes a little more detail. And it was such a and it literally was a great match, and like I said, one of my favorites. It's right there. It's time between. It's almost pretty much it might be number 2. Because I think I get more goosebumps watching that than I do Austin Rock. But and even Austin Rock, honorable mention, Austin Rock 19 was still amazing too. Rock full blown heel. Now we know that was Austin's last match, but you can see the emotion in that too, as far as Rock finally beating Austin at WrestleMania. That was another good one as well. So yeah, I'm really really liking a lot of people's answers here, and I think they kind of get it, like what gets you there. Now, Ted, do you have any? I know you've kind of talked about each one, but do you have a personal one yourself that you would say is your favorite?
So this is a cop-out answer because I don't think I can identify one, but I have thought of certain moments that I remember, watching and being like, whoa, like it really got me. One is, and it's you might laugh, but truly I remember being so invested because I thought this might be Stone Cold's last match. It was when he put his career on the line against Vince McMahon in a steel cage at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre '99. But there's moments where he would whip Vince's ass and then go to climb the cage and then climb back in. And I remember literally screaming like, "Don't do it! He's gonna get you!" I just was so upset that he might possibly lose his career at that time. At that age, I was still thought, it was, very real to me.
Shout out to Big Show for being under the ring that whole entire time. How big he is.
I had to be very uncomfortable, his big ass under that ring, because I've been under the ring before, and for someone that's less than half the size of the Big Show, it's not comfortable. So that kudos to him for doing that. I also remember, I don't remember the match itself, but I remember being really, really upset. I remember at the time Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett were the tag team champions, and they did a great job getting heat with me at the time as again a fan, because I remember them talking about how they were the greatest tag team, and I remember as a fan thinking, well, they're not even a real tag team. They don't even have a real tag team name. They come out to 2 different entrance musics. How are they going to be the best tag team? And I think the Headbangers at the time were chasing them, and I wasn't even a big Headbangers fan, but I remember thinking I want them to win because they are a real tag team. And they did something, I think it was maybe a dusty finish or something, where the Headbangers won the titles, but then they got screwed over and Jeff and Owen taken back. And I remember as a fan, I was never so mad as when Owen and Jeff took the titles back from the Headbangers. It was like on a Raw or something.
Enough. It's time for a change. Owen Hart, was that one?
Thanks. It was when him and Jeff. Yeah, it was right after that era when him and Jeff started teaming up, and I remember just being really upset with them at the time. I remember when Shawn Michaels came back and he had the big street fight with Triple H. Yeah. That was another one I was super emotionally invested in, because that was his first match back. Yeah. And I was wondering if he was going to be as good as I remember him being, and I thought he delivered. Delivered and then some. He really brought it.
I remember that same show, SummerSlam 2002. I actually literally, because I knew him from OVW and many times and watched him, but I legit was mad and hated Brock Lesnar, because I rumor has it Brock was going to go make a movie. I was like, no, he's not going to beat The Rock. The Rock's going to win. And I was so mad when Brock won and went on with the title, and I was like, now The Rock's leaving for months to go make the Scorpion King or whatever it was, or Mummy Returns, I think it was Scorpion King, and I was like, man, this just sucks, and I was so mad, and I was like, Brock, he goes, and even though he was from OVW, it was the only one that I literally hated from OVW, because OVW guys got caught up. I immediately was like, I supported them and loved them. I was like, all right, let's see what you can do, but not Brock Lesnar. I was mad.
Hey, it means he was doing his job then.
Exactly.
And speaking of OVW, I'll mention quickly. Of course, I could go on and on about all the emotional and great matches I've had. But no, in all seriousness, I remember, granted, I was in OVW at the time when I was training in wrestling. I was refereeing at the time. But Shawn Spears and Cody Rhodes had a great feud and great several matches. I don't think I can necessarily pinpoint one, but I remember those two tore it down. And as far as, all the years I've been in OVW, it's hard to pinpoint, the very best, but I remember that one really sticks out as just the emotion, the way they worked with each other, the intensity of it. It was all there. And the biggest shame of all that is there's a fair to good chance that no one will probably get a chance to see that match again, simply because, both those guys work for AEW and WWE owns all that footage. But if there ever is a time when they're able to release the stuff they were able to do with each other, I would love that, because I'd love to go back and watch, because I remember it was so good. And that was one of those things. I mean, really, that could have been a main event angle for any company in the world, and just for them to be able to pull out all the stops, it was great.
I know they use a lot of the footage for OVW when they do different things for like the Ruthless Aggression, little series they have right now. They show a lot of footage from OVW, and I understand why they have it and they use it, but I really wish they would put OVW in the archives where you can go watch stuff like that, and let you just go choose it and pick the match, and there it comes, watch the match.
Or at the very least have an OVW section where like maybe they can cherry pick guys that, either aren't wrestling for the competition, but at least, have a more expansive library of some of the stuff they did. Because there was some incredible things, and I'm obviously biased because I'm there, but I mean, I think anyone could, I mean, if you don't believe me, then if you get an opportunity to see the footage, I think it'll speak for itself. It was really,
and I'm right there with you. I mean, I was a fan of OVW. It's so amazing to say we work for them now, and it's kind of like that was kind of one of those surreal moments for me. But it's I've been a fan ever since the old building over in Jeffersonville. I remember before WWE. I remember Rob Conway and Nick Dinsmore before they were developmental, when they were the guys, and I remember watching. I used to get so heated over Jason Lee and Rip Rogers and their tag team, and how they would just, they should not be champions. Like, it's Rob and Nick, man, come on, it's just, and that was my team. I was a big fan, and Jason Lee and Rip Rogers would get so much heat, and I hated them so much. I started to chant "Jason likes boys," and at the time, now if you said that, I said Jason likes boys, but I meant it as in being homosexual. But at the same time, just liking boys. Nowadays, you say that it's no big deal. Although maybe boys it is, but it just was one of those things where it was just and I get the crowd going. I was like, yeah, here being a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, getting in the crowd chanting something made you feel special, part of the show. And to their credit, no, I don't like. He don't like boys, and that kind of turned into. And they kept it. It went forever. Like every time they had a show, they did it, and I was like, I was part of that. That was cool. So I was part of OVW history before I was at OVW. So
that's awesome.
Tell Jason Lee that if I ever got the chance to. I know he's come in and out throughout the years, but always wanted to tell him that hey, I was in the crowd chanting that when you were
Hey, that'd be would be a really interesting ringside to talk about his his time at OVW, especially since he was around a lot of those guys that came up around that time. And from what I understand, I mean, I've met him a couple of times, but he seems like a really laid back, easygoing guy. I would imagine he'd be up for doing something like that. That'd be really cool.
He came back a few years ago for a little stint, right? With I think it was right when Rob came back into, and Danny did a couple things, and
I think they were doing like the old school veteran thing. I think it was like him and Vic the Bruiser, maybe Randy Royal was a part of that. I'm not sure, but I know it was a few of those older guys that had came back, and I remember it was being a good little angle that they were running at the time. But I know he's still around, and I don't think he wrestles anymore. But that would be an interesting interview. I personally would be interested to hear some of the stories he'd have to share.
I would love. Talk to a lot of those older guys, man. It's Good stuff. Yeah, he was around. Yeah, he was around a lot of that. And I remember going to Louisville Gardens. OVW would have big shows at Louisville Gardens once a month, and they would bring in guys like Lawler and the Headbangers even one time, and Brian Christopher, and I think Scotty Jolly was his tag team, but they wasn't. Were they just
they were too much.
Too much. That's what it was. It was something.
It was Scott Too Hot Taylor and
Too Sexy, right?
Too Sexy Brian Christopher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Too much. Right. I remember that.
And then they turned into Too Cool, right? I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then they added Rikishi, and the rest is history. Then the worm happened.
Then the worm happened, and the Usos were born somewhere in there. So.
Well.
Hey, speaking of the late great Brian Christopher, he actually was on the show too, and he shared a funny story behind Rikishi and doing that what do you call it? Stink face, and he shared a interesting story, and that Brian Christopher was an interesting character. I'll just say that, but you should go back and check that episode out, guys, if you're listening to the show for the first time. But yeah, so I like I said, I wanted to have you on. I appreciate you coming on and doing this special episode, talking about, because right now it's kind of a weird time because we're not seeing the fans and what those fans can do in a match and make, it almost seems like, and of course, a lot of, if anybody's been wrestling or been involved, I mean, we have a lot of matches, so to speak, training, practicing with empty arenas all the time. We might have 3 or 4 people watching, so it's not a normal thing for them to do that. When people say how they, it's hard to work that. Well, yeah, but if you've ever legit been in training and been through you're going to have these matches anyways with nobody around. So it does make it, of course, it is different because you're learning, practicing. I get all that, but so it's not like these guys have never done it before. It's just they've never went full blown as far as we're going to go do the overall finish or whatnot. It's kind of just here's a few minutes to do a couple reps or whatnot, and then we can learn from there. It's just I wanted to talk about how you can emotionally get invested, and we'll see. Like I said, only time will tell if this WrestleMania be something 10 years from now. We'll talk about as being, oh my goodness, this match was whatever because of this reason. Rockin' Mankind did Halftime Heat and Empty Arena, and it was great. And
right.
So it can be done, but that was just one match compared to 14. So we'll like I said, we'll see. Only time will tell. Do you, Ted, do you have any final thoughts or anything in regards to?
Well, I'd say certainly, at this time, I'd encourage anyone that's maybe, missing, the live wrestling aspect right now to maybe go back and watch some of these matches and try to relive those moments. And also wanted to, even though I can't necessarily pinpoint one match from that event, another one that stands out for just the emotion of it was the first ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view. And actually, I take that back. The next year when they had Rob Van Dam and John Cena, that's another one that stands out as just, the pure emotional investment. I remember when they threw back the John Cena shirt in the ring. Oh, yeah. It was just what an incredible moment that was. So, I mean, it's really cool to think about some of those, great emotional moments. And I'd really encourage the fans that are missing wrestling right now to go back and watch some of those matches that we covered, just because I think that at least, might get you out of, being stuck between your 4 walls for a little bit and kind of put yourself back in time and some of those great moments of history. But either way, it's really cool to look back at some of those moments and realize those are really the moments that help shape professional wrestling what it is today. Those emotional moments that really helped drive the stories and help shape the wrestling world as it goes forward.
What looking, there's a lot of debuts. I think I still get goosebumps when I hear Jericho's debut. WF, that right, the Rock's in the middle of the ring, and the countdown, and the crowd went nuts when they as soon as the Jericho name came on the screen. It was just it was crazy. But I put this out there, and I've had a few people comment, and the answer seems to be the same. There's a few that say the other one, but you've heard the term Road Warrior pop, but then my question was, who had the biggest pop? Was it Road Warriors or was it Stone Cold Steve Austin? And, a lot of people say Austin, and a few say, well, it's called the Road Warrior pop for a reason, so Road Warriors. But it also was called that because they're the ones that used to have it up. No one else had that pop until, in my opinion, Steve Austin. And I think he overcame and surpassed the Road Warriors because there was nothing like turning on the Attitude Era. Even to this day, you watch Raw or whatever, if there's a crowd and that glass shatters, that place is going berserk. They're going nuts. Yeah. And I've been in the crowd before. I've been in that crowd when that glass shatters, and before. And you go nuts. And even at the time, I was more of a rock than I was Austin. I always pick rock over Austin. But when Austin's music hits, I went nuts just because it was exciting. And so I personally, and I'll hear your take on it. Personally, I think Austin had the biggest pop, and I don't think there'll ever be a bigger pop than Steve Austin in wrestling, just in my opinion.
Well, Daniel, I love finding reasons to disagree with you. Unfortunately, I can't on that one. I agree. Stone Cold, I do think had ultimately and again, I'm biased, but I remember looking back, and those truly were the best reactions that he got to me ever. I mean, it was incredible. And you just saw the crowd literally go as soon as that glass shattered, and it was incredible.
And the atmosphere of the Attitude Era was different anyways. I remember I watched back an old Raw, and just everyone with the signs, everyone was standing on the feet the entire time. I mean, it was a different world, but they were all waiting literally for that glass to drop and for Steve to come out there and do. And you never know what he's going to do. And that's what I think also helped. But like I said, I think of course, we all know, Hulk is no longer with us, so we get the Road Warriors really can't come out anymore. But if that would have rushed, I think you still would hear a pop. But I just to this day, I mean, Austin's going to get the pop forever. There's moments where people have, like Hardy Boys returning in WrestleMania 33, and music, and that was a great moment, great loud pop. Even if something happened where, say CM Punk, I think he's probably the only one that can come close with if his music hits at an event, they're going to go nuts.
True, and I think if he came back, the first, when they finally can have live wrestling again, if CM Punk were to find a way to come back with that music hit, that one could rival up there for sure.
It could get there, but I don't think it'll keep. I don't think it'll stay. I think it'll get for the first few shows where people are in the arena, it would go nuts. But I think it's never going to surpass Steve Austin. I think if CM Punk comes out, does this thing, crowd goes nuts, and then let's say the glass shatter. They're just gonna magnify and go even more crazier. So it's just something about that Steve Austin pop, and the loudest pop. Somebody said that the loudest decimal recording of the pop of Steve Austin was ever recorded was when Mick Foley won the title that famous night and then his music hits. He comes out there to whatever, and you can, if you go back and find it on YouTube and watch it, it is super loud, and they're right. It was. That place went crazy. And that was a recorded Raw too, which is crazy to think.
Yeah. Well, I remember at the time, I do remember that pretty vividly, because Stone Cold had been gone for whatever reason for like a month or something prior to that, and that was when he was white hot. So like people had missed him at that time, and so you didn't have any expectation that Stone Cold was going to come out. It was Mick Foley and The Rock, and Corporation had come in to try to help The Rock win, and then DX fought him off, but then it looked like The Rock was going to screw over Mick Foley and beat him, and then Stone Cold came back out of nowhere, and that was like the ultimate situation to explode.
And that's another emotional, because I remember watching WCW, and I remember they said don't turn. I remember Shivani, that crazy, he used to be Cactus Jack here, that crazy Mick Foley is going to win the title. I was like, seriously?
If anyone in wrestling ever had to eat their words.
But it's sitting there. I remember I was going to watch Raw. I always went back and forth, so I was watching it anyways. But it made me like really. I couldn't wait for the main event. Now I was like, really, I can't wait to watch this. Like it actually made me. So I was one of the people that like, well, I guess I'm gonna pretty much hurry up. Let's get to it, because I don't care. There was nothing the NWO or WCW and all that could have done to turn me away from that moment. And it was another emotional. Just can't believe they actually, because that was the first. Can't believe they put the title on him. Can't believe this. You never thought it would have happened. He didn't have the look that Vince went for, all that stuff. And then so it was another emotional moment. Those I would call those moments in matches. But yeah, it's amazing how the fan base and what you can do with that. And it's what makes us all fans. It's what makes us enjoy it. If we wasn't emotionally invested in something at one time, we wouldn't really be fans, and we probably wouldn't be in the business. You and I.
I was gonna say we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
No, we wouldn't.
Honestly.
there would be no Ringside podcast, or would be, yeah, you're right, because we would do something else. So yeah. Well, Ted, where can they find you on the social media?
Well, you can catch me obviously on Facebook, Ted McNaler. I am also on Instagram and Twitter. Just look up Ted the Manbeast. You can follow me on either of those platforms, and love to have your follow. And you know that I always like to share things that are funny, motivational, educational, and just all around, at least I think, interesting. So please feel free to follow me on any of those platforms.
People always heard you a couple weeks ago. We started the Ringside Joke of the Week, which we're calling it the Ringside WTF, meaning was that funny?
Oh, I like it.
So yeah, so you were the first week. We had to skip a week, and then next week, or the last week was KTD. I did say, if you heard the last episode, I think you kind of won the first round. So I tell you what, we won't be playing. Next week we'll go back to the. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Last week this past episode we did our WrestleMania review, and we heard yours. We won't be playing KTDs today because we'll play KTDs next week, and then we'll see who won that one. And so we appreciate you doing those ringside what WTFs of the week, and hopefully I'm sure many more to come. And then KTD acts like he's going to win it all. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to have a joke battle or something.
Hey, I welcome the competition anytime, any place, KTD, and bring your A game because, in fact, you might want to pack a lunch too because it's just you better bring it, KTD. I'll just leave it at that.
Ooh, I like it. Well, again, Ted, thanks for coming on. As always, you can find us on the podcast avenues, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio app. RingsidePodcast.com, or of course Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, the whole 9 yards, on the BarnBurner network as well. We appreciate our partnership with BarnBurner. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to Collar and Elbow. That's right. When you go to collarandelbowbrand.com, use promo code Ringside, all capital letters. You save 10% on your entire order. So appreciate that. And of course, just to throw us out there on social media, you can get us all on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Ringside Podcast. Individually, I'm at Daniel Spencer, and we'll throw our co-host out there at Jeremy_CSZ. Even though he's not on the show, he wasn't able to join us this episode, so it's okay. I know. Next time we'll maybe get him on. I think there's a way we can do a three-way thing here. So maybe next time we have you on video, we'll get Jeremy involved as well. That way he can. Be a part. I have a feeling both of y'all just tag team against me though. So,
well, it's all in good fun.
Right.
At least for us, it is.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. All right, Tev. Again, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Take care.